He wore a leather jacket and carried the look of a man who'd seen too much. She was a little girl in a blue dress, holding a cardboard sign that read "For sale." When their paths crossed on a quiet street in the English countryside, no one imagined how much that moment would change. Some encounters feel like coincidence, but sometimes it's fate reminding us that kindness still exists. The morning mist clung to Larkspur village like a grey shroud, muffling the rumble of motorcycles as they rolled through the narrow high street. Ethan Blake rode at the front of the pack, his leather jacket bearing the worn insignia of the Ravens, a bird in flight, stitched in silver thread that had long since faded. Behind him, 6 men followed in loose formation, their engines a synchronized growl that echoed off Tudor facades and stone walls that had stood for centuries. They were heading nowhere in particular, as they did most Sundays, just riding to feel the wind, to escape the weight of lives that had taken unexpected turns. Ethan had learned long ago that movement was better than stillness. Movement meant you couldn't be cornered by memories. Then Marcus, riding flank, raised his fist, the signal to stop. Ethan saw it immediately, a splash of color against the gray morning. On the pavement outside the old chemist's shop, a little girl stood holding a cardboard sign. Her dress was powder blue, clean but faded, and her dark hair was pulled into pigtails that hung unevenly. Beside her, propped against the curb, sat a pink bicycle with white streamers dangling from the handlebars. The sign, written in careful child's handwriting, read simply, "For sale." Ethan killed his engine. The others followed suit, and suddenly the street was silent except for the distant cry of a crow. He dismounted, his boots heavy on the cobblestones, and approached slowly. The girl's eyes tracked him wide, brown, afraid but determined. "Hello there," Ethan said, his voice softer than his appearance suggested. "That's a lovely bike. How much are you asking?" The girl clutched the sign tighter. Her knuckles were white. £20, sir, please." £20 for a bicycle that, even worn, was worth 3 times that. Ethan crouched down to her level, bringing his weathered face closer to hers. He could see now that her eyes were rimmed red, and her chin trembled despite her best efforts to appear brave. "That seems awful cheap," he said gently. "Why are you selling it?" The girl's composure cracked. A tear rolled down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly with the back of her hand. "Mummy hasn't eaten in 2 days. I need to help." The words hit Ethan like a fist to the sternum. Behind him, he heard someone, probably Danny, curse under their breath. Ethan straightened and looked around. Across the street, partially hidden in the doorway of a charity shop, stood a woman. She was thin, painfully so, wrapped in a threadbare shawl despite the autumn chill. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and shame. "Is that your mum?" Ethan asked. The girl nodded. "Her name is Grace. My name is Lily." "Lily," Ethan repeated. "That's a beautiful name." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting 2 £20 notes. "I'll give you 40 for it. Deal?" Lily's eyes widened. "But sir, I only asked for—" "I insist," Ethan said, pressing the notes into her small hand. "A bike like that with such a brave owner is worth every penny." Marcus stepped forward then, his massive frame casting a shadow over them both. "Tell you what, love, keep the bike. Our mate here is terrible at riding bicycles anyway. Too tall, see?" He winked, and despite everything, Lily's mouth twitched into an almost smile. Ethan shot Marcus a look of gratitude. "He's right. I'd look ridiculous on it. You keep it, and the money too. But I need you to promise me something." "What, sir?" "Promise me you'll tell me what happened. Why your mum isn't eating. Why you're out here alone. Lily glanced toward the doorway where Grace stood. The woman had stepped forward slightly, and Ethan could see the conflict in her face, pride warring with desperation. Finally, Grace gave a small, defeated nod. "She used to work at the hospital," Lily began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they made her leave. Said she was bad at her job. But that's not true, sir. Mummy was the best nurse. She helped everyone. But now nobody will give her work. They say terrible things about her. And we don't have any money left." Ethan felt something shift inside his chest, something he'd kept locked away for years. He'd seen injustice before, worn its scars on his own soul. But seeing it inflicted on a child, on a woman too exhausted to fight back, that was different. He stood and walked toward Grace. She straightened, trying to summon dignity she no longer had energy for. "Ma'am," Ethan said, "I'd like to help if you'll let me." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Ethan said. "It's justice. And if there's one thing we know about," he gestured to the men behind him, "it's fighting for what's right." The Ravens gathered at their usual haunt, the Crossed Keys, a pub tucked down a narrow alley where the landlord, old Tom, never asked questions and always kept the back room available. Rain had started falling, drumming against the leaded windows as 7 men sat around a scarred wooden table, pints untouched. Ethan stared at the photograph Lily had given him before they left Grace in her nurse's uniform, smiling, healthy, standing outside St. Michael's Hospital. The contrast with the hollow-eyed woman he'd seen to do was devastating. "We don't even know her story," said Marcus, always the practical one. His hands, scarred from years as a mechanic, wrapped around his glass. "Could be she actually did something wrong. You saw that kid's face," Danny shot back. "He was the youngest of them, barely 30, with quick anger and a quicker heart. Nobody innocent suffers like that." "Danny's right," said James, the quiet one. He'd been a teacher once, before the accusations that were never proven but never forgotten. "There's a particular kind of desperation that comes from being wrongly condemned. I recognize it." Ethan raised his hand for silence. "Marcus has a point, though. We need facts before we act. This isn't Afghanistan. We can't just storm in." The reference hung heavy. 3 of them, Nathan, Marcus, and Patrick, had served together. They'd come back changed, hardened, struggling to fit into a country that thanked them for their service but couldn't meet their eyes. The others had different stories. James, with his ruined reputation. Danny, with his prison record for a crime he'd committed, save his sister Graham with his divorce and bankruptcy. Simon, with his decades-long battle against addiction. They were broken men, all of them. But broken didn't mean useless. "I know someone at the hospital," said Patrick, speaking for the first time. He was the oldest, grey threading through his beard, a former paramedic who had lost his license after reporting unsafe conditions. Nurse named Helen. If there was trouble involving staff, she'd know. "Talk to her," Ethan said discreetly. "What about the kid?" Graham asked. His voice was rough from years of smoking, but his eyes were kind. "Can't have her selling her things in the street. That's no childhood." Ethan nodded slowly. An idea was forming, one that felt right, in a way nothing had felt right for a long time. "We help them, but quietly. Grace won't accept handouts. I saw that much in her face. We need to be clever about it." "The house," Simon said suddenly. He'd been silent until now, fingers drumming against the table, a nervous habit from his using days. "I walked past their address earlier. The place is falling apart. Broken gutters, peeling paint, cracked windows. What if we just ... fixed it?" Marcus grinned. "Now that's an idea. I've got supplies. Danny, you can do electrical. Simon knows plumbing. We could do it in a day while she's out, breaking and entering to commit home improvement, James said dryly. That's a new one. It's not breaking if we're invited, Ethan said. And we will be. Eventually. Patrick cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. I asked around a bit before we came here. The hospital director who fired her, name's Malcolm Thornbury. He's been there 15 years, practically runs the place. Respected in the community, church council member, all that. So, Danny challenged. So men like that don't fire good nurses without reason, Patrick continued, unless they have something to hide. The table fell silent. Outside, the rain intensified, and somewhere in the distance, church bells tolled the hour. Ethan thought of his own return from deployment, how he'd been turned away from job after job, how people had looked at his tattoos and his scars and decided they knew everything about him. He thought of the night he'd contemplated driving his motorcycle off Blackwater Bridge, and how Marcus had shown up, somehow knowing, and said nothing, just sat with him until dawn. That was when the Ravens had truly been born, not as a motorcycle club, but as a brotherhood of the discarded, men who'd learned that society's judgment wasn't the final word. We investigate, Ethan said finally. We find out what really happened, and if Grace was wronged, he looked around the table. Meeting each man's eyes, we make it right. 7 heads nodded in unison. The week that followed felt like preparation for battle, though the weapons this time were questions instead of rifles. Patrick returned from his conversation with Helen the nurse, wearing a grim expression that told Ethan everything before words were spoken. They met at dawn near the canal, where morning mist rose from the water and narrowboats rocked gently at their moorings. Patrick lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. Helen's terrified, he said. Wouldn't talk at first, but we go back years, and she trusts me. He exhaled smoke that mingled with the fog. Grace reported irregularities in the hospital's supply contracts. Medical equipment being purchased at inflated prices from a company owned by Thornbury's brother-in-law. Corruption, Ethan said flatly. Millions of pounds over several years. NHS money disappearing into private pockets, while wards went understaffed and equipment stayed outdated. Grace found the paperwork by accident, took it to the board. Patrick's jaw tightened. Thornbury got ahead of it. Started rumors about Grace stealing medications, falsifying patient records. By the time the investigation cleared her, the damage was done. The board believed him because he's Malcolm Bloody Thornbury, pillar of the community, and Grace blacklisted. Not officially, but everyone knows. Small town like this, reputation is everything. She can't get nursing work, and most other employers won't touch her either. Ethan watched a duck paddle cross the canal, oblivious to the human dramas playing out on its banks. We need proof. Helen's gathering what she can, but she's frightened. If Thornbury suspects, he won't. Ethan interrupted. Not yet. What about Grace herself? Has anyone actually talked to her? Patrick hesitated. That's your department, mate. You're the one with the people skills. It was meant as a joke. Ethan was famously taciturn, but there was truth in it. Among the Ravens, he was the conscience, the moral compass that kept them from sliding into the darkness they'd all flirted with. That afternoon, Ethan found Grace at a house on the western edge of town, scrubbing floors for a family who barely acknowledged her existence. He waited outside until she emerged, bucket in hand, moving with the slow deliberation of the exhausted. "Mrs. Grace," he called gently. She turned, startled, then wary. "Mr. Blake, I didn't expect. I wanted to return something." He held out Lily's drawing, the one she'd pressed into his hand that first day, a crude crayon picture of a woman and child holding hands under a yellow sun. "Found it in my jacket." Thought you'd want it. Grace's face softened. She took the drawing carefully, as if it were made of glass. She drew this when she still believed in happy endings. And you don't. I can't afford to, Mr. Blake. Grace's voice was steady, but her eyes held years of accumulated pain. Believing gets you hurt. I served in Helmand Province, Ethan said quietly. Lost friends. Came home to a country that didn't know what to do with me. I stopped believing too for a while. What changed? I met people who refused to give up on me, even when I had given up on myself. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I know what happened at the hospital. What you tried to do. Grace went rigid. Who told you? Does it matter? What matters is the truth. You tried to expose corruption, and they destroyed you for it. I couldn't prove anything, Grace said bitterly. They were too clever, too careful, and I was just a nurse. Who believes nurses over directors? People who care about truth, Ethan said. People like us. You can't help me. But there was hope in her voice now, fragile and afraid to show itself. Watch us try. The operation began on a Tuesday morning, when Grace took Lily to school, then walked to a cleaning job 3 miles away. She couldn't afford bus fare. The ravens descended on the small terraced house like a precision military unit, except, instead of weapons, they carried toolboxes and paint cans. Marcus had procured materials through means he didn't elaborate on. Fell off a truck was his standard explanation. Danny rewired the dodgy electrical outlets that had made Ethan's skin crawl when he'd first seen them. Graham repaired the gutters, his hand steady on the ladder, despite his age. Simon fixed the leaking pipes under the kitchen sink, talking quietly to himself in the focused way that meant he was genuinely engaged, genuinely present, genuinely sober. James painted the exterior, with help from Patrick, both men working in companionable silence, broken only by occasional observations about proper brush technique. Ethan coordinated everything, ensuring each task flowed into the next, checking quality with an eye honed by years of military discipline. They worked with purpose, born of shared understanding. Every man there had been helped when he needed it most, had been pulled back from edges, both literal and metaphorical. This was how you repaid that debt, by passing it forward. By mid-afternoon the transformation was remarkable. The house that had looked abandoned now gleamed with fresh paint and functioning infrastructure. Inside, they'd done more repaired cupboards, fixed the temperamental oven, replaced broken tiles. Nothing fancy, but everything essential. She'll think she's at the wrong address, Danny said with satisfaction, standing back to admire their work. She'll know it was us, Patrick countered. Let her, Ethan said. Sometimes people need to see that someone cares enough to act. As they were packing up, an elderly woman emerged from the neighboring house, her face creased with suspicion. What's all this then? What are you lot doing to Grace's house? Fixing it, missus. Ethan approached with his hands visible, non-threatening. Fletcher. And Grace didn't mention any repairs. Surprise, Marcus called cheerfully from the ladder. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes narrowed. I know who you are. You're those bikers. People say a lot of things. Ethan interrupted gently. Most of it wrong. We're just helping a neighbor. Grace isn't your neighbor. She's someone's neighbor, James said, joining them, his teacher's voice calm and reasonable. Doesn't that make her everyone's responsibility? Mrs. Fletcher studied him, then Ethan, then the freshly painted house. Her expression shifted, something softening. I've lived next to Grace and Lily for 2 years. I've watched that woman work herself to nothing, watched that little girl try to be brave. I've felt ashamed every day that I didn't do more. It's not too late, Ethan said. What did she do? Mrs. Fletcher asked suddenly. to deserve this town's cruelty. She told the truth when powerful people wanted lies. The old woman nodded slowly. Then she's braver than most. Tell her, she hesitated. Tell her I'll look after Lily sometimes. No charge. And I make a decent shepherd's pie, if she accept it. After she went back inside, Danny shook his head in wonder. One kindness leading to another. Maybe we're starting something. Maybe, Ethan said. But he was thinking ahead, to the harder part of their mission. Fixing houses was straightforward. Fixing injustice required different tools. That evening, they reconvened at the Crossed Keys. Patrick spread papers across the table, documents Helen had carefully copied, showing the pattern of inflated contracts and suspicious transactions. It wasn't enough for legal action, not yet, but it was a start. Thornbury's careful, Patrick explained. Everything technically legal, just deeply unethical. His brother-in-law's company provides real services, just at prices triple the market rate, and the board approves it, James said, scanning the papers with practiced eyes. Why? Because Thornbury's been there forever. He's established. Nobody questions him. Ethan studied the documents, his mind working through possibilities. We need someone inside. Someone with access to more complete records. Helen's already risking enough, Patrick said firmly. Not Helen. Ethan looked up. We need to go higher. Saturday afternoon found Ethan alone at Blackwater War Memorial, standing before the names of men who hadn't come home. His own name could have been there, nearly was, several times. He traced his fingers over etched letters, remembering faces, voices, final moments. Thought I'd find you here. Ethan turned to see a man in his 60s, walking with a slight limp grey beard, neatly trimmed. Colonel Andrew Morrison, retired, his former commanding officer, and the closest thing to a father Ethan had known since his own had died. Sir, Ethan acknowledged. None of that, Morrison said gruffly, coming to stand beside him. I'm not your CO anymore. Just an old man with too much time. He paused. Patrick called me. Said you were getting involved in something complicated. Patrick talks too much. Patrick worries about you. As do one. Morrison's voice was gentle. Ethan, you can't save everyone. I'm not trying to save everyone. Just one woman and her daughter, and taking on Malcolm Thornbury in the process. Morrison sighed. I know him. He's on the hospital board of trustees, influential in local government. If you accuse him without ironclad proof, he's destroying innocent lives. Ethan interrupted, his voice harder than intended. I know, and it makes me sick. Morrison turned to face him fully. But you need to be smart about this. Thornbury has power, connections. You have a motorcycle club full of men with questionable pasts. Those men are the best people I know. I don't doubt it. But the world doesn't see them that way, and you know it. They see criminals and troublemakers. Thornbury will use that against you. Ethan felt the familiar frustration rising, the anger at a world that judged surfaces and missed depths. So we do nothing. Let him win. I didn't say that. Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Helen Davies contacted me yesterday. Brave woman. She's been documenting everything, not just the financial irregularities, but the whole pattern of retaliation against Grace. Dates, conversations, witnesses who were too frightened to speak before. Ethan took the card. It belonged to a journalist at The Guardian, investigative division. You give her this evidence, through proper channels, and Thornbury can't touch you, Morrison continued. Meanwhile, I'll use my contacts on the hospital board. Some of them have been uneasy about Thornbury for a while. They just needed someone to give them courage. Why are you helping? Morrison smiled sadly. Because I've watched too many good people suffer in silence. Because Grace reminds me of my own daughter, who faced similar injustice in her workplace and nearly didn't survive it. And because he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, you boys deserve a win. You've carried enough losses. That evening, the Ravens met in Graham's garage, a space large enough for their motorcycles and equipped with a wood stove that kept the autumn chill at bay. They sat in their usual circle, and Ethan shared Morrison's plan. "So we go legitimate," Danny said, disappointment evident. "No confrontation, no justice meted out." "Justice doesn't always look like vengeance," James reminded him. "Sometimes it looks like process." "I prefer the other kind," Marcus muttered, but he was smiling. Simon cleared his throat. "I saw Lily yesterday. She was at the playground, alone, pushing herself on the swings, looking at other kids playing with their parents." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "She waved at me, like I was someone trustworthy. Do you know how long it's been since anyone looked at me that way?" The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Each man there had been judged, dismissed, written off. Each had learned that redemption wasn't give, it was fought for, earned, through quiet actions and persistent presence. "We do this right," Ethan said finally. "We give Helen's evidence to the journalist, support Morrison's efforts with the board, and we keep helping Grace and Lily however we can. No glory, no dramatic confrontations. Just steady, relentless pressure until the truth comes out." "And if Thornbury fights back?" Patrick asked. "Then he'll discover what we learned in Afghanistan," Marcus said quietly. "That patience is deadlier than aggression, and that men with nothing to lose are impossible to intimidate." The article appeared on a grey Thursday morning, above the fold in the Guardian's main section. "NHS Trust investigates procurement irregularities following whistleblower claims," ran the headline. And though Grace's name was protected, the details were damning. Malcolm Thornbury's brother-in-law's company, Pinnacle Medical Supplies, had received contracts worth £4.3 million over 5 years, with evidence suggesting prices inflated by as much as 300%. Ethan read it at the breakfast table of his small flat above the motorcycle repair shop he co-owned with Marcus. His phone had been buzzing since dawn, messages from the others, variations on the same theme, finally. But the real victory came 3 hours later when Patrick called, breathless. "Helen just rang. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow. Thornbury's suspended pending investigation." The Ravens descended on the Crossed Keys that afternoon, their celebration muted but genuine. They'd learned long ago that real victories were quiet things, measured in prevented suffering rather than defeated enemies. Grace appeared in the doorway just as dusk was settling over the village. She stood uncertainly, clearly having never been in a pub like this before, clutching her worn handbag. Ethan saw her first and rose immediately. "Mrs. Grace, I needed to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "The house, the article, everything. I know it was you." "It was a lot of people," Ethan said gently. "People who care about truth, but you started it. When you could have just driven past that morning, you stopped. You saw Lily, and you saw us." Tears streamed down her face now, and she made no attempt to hide them. "Do you know what that means? To be seen again after becoming invisible." Marcus stood, walked over, and to everyone's surprise, pulled Grace into a careful hug. "You were never invisible, love, just surrounded by people who chose not to look." One by one, the others approached, Danny offering his handkerchief, Graham pulling out a chair, Simon fetching water with hands that didn't shake. James simply nodded, his eyes conveying what words couldn't. Patrick cleared his throat and looked away, fighting his own emotions. "Lily wants to meet you all properly," Grace said when she'd composed herself. She talks about the kind men with motorcycles constantly. She drew pictures of each of you, even though she only saw you for a few minutes. We'd be honored, Ethan said. There's more. Grace reached into a handbag and pulled out an envelope. This arrived today, Steam. Catherine's Hospital in Birmingham. They are offering me a position, better pay, fresh start. Someone put in a word for me, someone influential, and I think I know who. Ethan thought of Morrison's subtle influence, his network of military and civilian contacts. You deserve it. I won't forget this, any of this. Lily won't either. Grace looked around at the 7 men, her expression fierce. The world is so quick to judge people by their appearance, their past. But you and all of you, you're proof that goodness lives in unexpected places. After she left, the men sat in silence, each lost in thought. Finally Danny spoke, his young voice uncharacteristically serious. Do you think we're actually good people? Or just broken ones trying to fix things? Maybe those aren't different things, James suggested. Maybe being broken teaches you to recognize other people's pain. I spent years believing I was worthless, Simon said quietly, that my addiction defined me. But helping Grace and Lily, it reminded me that I'm more than my worst moments. We all are, Marcus agreed. That's the point. But Graham, always the pragmatist, frowned. Don't celebrate yet. Thornbury's suspended, not finished. Men like him don't go quietly. He was right, of course. 2 days later the pushback began. It started subtly, whispers, that the Ravens had intimidated witnesses, that their involvement in Grace's situation was suspicious. Someone leaked information about their individual pasts. Danny's prison record, James's forced resignation, Simon's years in rehab. Local Facebook groups buzzed with speculation, old prejudices dressed in new language. Then came the official complaint. Malcolm Thornbury's solicitor filed a defamation claim against unnamed parties, arguing that the Guardian article had destroyed his client's reputation without sufficient evidence. The hospital board, under pressure, announced they'd hired an independent investigator who would need months to complete a thorough review. Ethan watched the momentum shift and felt the familiar weight of delayed justice. This was how power protected itself, through procedures and protocols that favored those with resources to wait them out. We keep going, he told the others when they gathered, frustration evident on every face. We trust the process Morrison set in motion. But in the privacy of his flat that night, Ethan stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw the exhaustion there. How many battles could one man fight? How many times could you stand up for right before the weight crushed you? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for fixing our house. Here's a picture Mummy said I could send. The attached image showed Lily's latest drawing. 7 motorcycles arranged in a protective circle around a small house, with stick figures representing a woman and child standing safely inside. Above it, in careful block letters, My Heroes. Ethan saved the image and returned to the living room, where his worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations lay open. He'd read it dozens of times during deployment, finding comfort in ancient wisdom. His eyes found a familiar passage. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Tomorrow he would continue being one. For now, that was enough. 3 weeks after the Guardian article, the hospital board announced its findings at a public meeting in Larkspur Village. Town Hall, a Victorian building with high ceilings and wooden pews that had witnessed countless community gatherings over the decades. The Ravens arrived early, sitting in the back row. 7 men in leather jackets, among pensioners and concerned residents. Grace sat near the front, Helen beside her, both women rigid with anxiety. Lily was with Mrs. Fletcher, kept safely away from whatever might unfold. Malcolm Thornbury entered to scattered murmurs, a tall man in his 50s, silver-haired and distinguished in an expensive suit. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, scanning the room with barely concealed contempt until his eyes landed on the ravens. His expression flickered, annoyance mixed with calculation. The board chair, a severe woman named Margaret Cole, called the meeting to order. Her voice was crisp, professional, and carefully neutral. "We're here to present findings from our investigation into procurement practices at St. Wash, Michael's Hospital, specifically regarding contracts awarded to Pinnacle Medical Supplies for 45 minutes. She detailed the evidence methodically, emails showing Thornbury had pressured the procurement committee, financial records revealing his wife's 20% ownership stake in Pinnacle that he'd failed to disclose, testimony from staff members too frightened to speak earlier. The pattern was undeniable, systematic corruption enabled by institutional complacency. Furthermore, Cole continued, her voice hardening, we found evidence of a coordinated campaign to discredit Nurse Grace Winters after she attempted to report these irregularities. This included false allegations entered into her employment record, deliberate exclusion from professional development opportunities, and informal communications to other potential employers that we can only describe as defamatory. Grace's shoulders shook. Helen gripped her hand. Thornbury stood abruptly. This is a travesty. I have dedicated 15 years to this hospital, Mr. Thornbury. Cole interrupted. You'll have opportunity to respond. Please sit. But Thornbury was past reason, his composure finally cracking. You're taking the word of a disgruntled former employee, and these, he gestured toward, the ravens, these hooligans, who've clearly manipulated the situation for their own purposes. Who are they? Criminals and outcasts, who've somehow convinced you they're heroes. Ethan felt Marcus tense beside him, but placed a restraining hand on his friend's arm. This wasn't the moment for reaction. This was the moment for patience. Colonel Morrison stood from his seat, 3 rows ahead. Ethan hadn't even known he was there. Point of order, Margaret. May I speak? Cole nodded. Colonel Morrison, you have the floor. Morrison's voice carried the authority of decades of military service. I've known these hooligans, as Mr. Thornbury calls them, for various lengths of time. 3 served with distinction in Afghanistan. Another spent 20 years as a teacher before being falsely accused of misconduct. Another nearly died helping his sister escape an abusive relationship. Are they perfect? No. Have they made mistakes? Certainly. But they saw injustice and acted, which is more than can be said for most of us. This is ridiculous, Thornbury sputtered. They have no standing. They have more standing than you, sir. Morrison's voice cracked like a whip, because they acted without expectation of reward or recognition. They helped a desperate family because it was right, not because it benefited them. Can you say the same? The hall erupted in murmurs. Cole gavelled for order, then delivered the board's decision. Malcolm Thornbury was terminated for gross misconduct, subject to referral to the General Medical Council for fitness to practice review. The hospital would implement new procurement oversight procedures and conduct a comprehensive review of any staff member who'd faced retaliation. And Grace Winters would receive a formal apology, expungement of her employment record, and compensation for professional and reputational damage. When it was over, people filed out slowly, processing what they'd witnessed. Grace approached the ravens, tears streaming, but words seemed inadequate. She simply embraced each of them in turn. Thornbury intercepted them at the door, his face purple with rage. You think you've won. You're nothing. Damaged goods playing at heroism. This town will never, Malcolm. The quiet voice belonged to Reverend Williams from St. Andrew's Church, a man in his 70s who'd baptized half the village. Go home. Accept what you've brought upon yourself with grace, or leave with what little dignity you have left. Thornbury left, his defeat absolute. Outside, under streetlights that cast golden pools on cobblestones, Ethan found Morrison. Thank you, don't thank me. You boys did the work. Morrison paused. You know what strikes me about tonight? It wasn't just about Grace. It was about everyone in that room seeing that change is possible, that power can be challenged, that ordinary people can make a difference. We're hardly ordinary, Marcus joked. No, Morrison agreed, his expression serious. You're better, because you know what it means to fall and rise again. The morning Grace and Lily left for Birmingham arrived with unseasonable sunshine, as if nature itself was celebrating new beginnings. The Ravens gathered at their house, no longer shabby, but welcoming. Painted fresh white with window boxes, Mrs. Fletcher had helped Lily plant. A small moving van was being loaded with the sparse possessions that represented their entire life. Grace moved between rooms with efficient sadness, checking empty cupboards one last time, making sure nothing was forgotten. Lily appeared in the doorway, wearing her backpack, clutching a folder of drawings. She'd grown in the past weeks, not physically, but in the way children do when they discover the world might be safe again. Her eyes had lost their haunted look, replaced by cautious hope. Are you really leaving? Danny asked, crouching to her level. We have to. Mummy's new job starts Monday. Lily's voice was small but steady. But I'll remember you, all of you. We'll remember you too, little one, Graham said, his rough voice gentle. Lily opened her folder and began distributing drawings, one for each man, carefully labeled with their names. Ethan's showed him on his motorcycle, helmet tucked under one arm, with the leader written underneath in crayon. Marcus was depicted mid-laugh, the strong one. James had a book in his hands, the wise one. Each portrait captured something essential, seen through a child's perceptive eyes. These are remarkable, James said, genuinely moved. You're quite the artist. Mummy says I get it from my daddy, Lily said quietly. He used to draw too, before he died. Grace appeared behind her daughter, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. Lily was only 3 when we lost Thomas. Cancer. He was an illustrator. That's where she gets her talent. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and the others echoed him. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Grace hadn't just been fighting institutional corruption, but doing it alone, without a partner, carrying grief alongside poverty. Thomas would have liked you all, Grace said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He always believed in the goodness that hides in unexpected places. He used to say that the most beautiful souls often wear the roughest armor. Simon stepped forward, pulling something from his pocket, a small pewter raven on a leather cord. For you, Lily. So you remember us. Ravens mate for life, did you know that? And they're fiercely loyal. Once you're part of our flock, you always are. Lily took it reverently, fastening it around her neck immediately. I'll never take it off, promise. The moving van driver honked impatiently. Mrs. Fletcher emerged from next door with a hamper of food for the journey, fussing over Grace like a mother hen, making her promise to call when they arrived safely. Other neighbors appeared to people who'd been silent during Grace's persecution, but who'd found courage in recent weeks to speak to her, to apologize, to acknowledge their own complicity in her suffering. The house, Grace said to Ethan, handing him a key. I couldn't sell it, the market's slow, and we needed to leave. But it's yours if you want it. or the Ravens Clubhouse, or whatever you need. Consider it payment for what you've done." "We didn't do it for payment," Ethan protested. "I know, which is exactly why you deserve it." Grace pressed the key into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "Please, let something good come from all this. Let this place that held so much sadness become somewhere people find hope." Marcus cleared his throat. "We could use a proper meeting space. Somewhere the community could see us as more than just scary bikers. Maybe run some programs for H-Whisk youth, kids who need mentors." "Now there's an idea," Patrick said thoughtfully. "Teaching them motorcycle maintenance, life skills, giving them what we wish we'd had." "The Ravens Youth Center," James suggested, "has a nice ring to it." Grace smiled through her tears. "Thomas would love that. Our home becoming a place that builds people up instead of breaking them down." The final goodbyes were harder than anyone expected. Lily hugged each man tightly, her small arms fierce with determination to memorize the feeling. Grace simply held Ethan's hands for a long moment, no words necessary, her eyes conveying gratitude too deep for language. As their car pulled away, Lily's face appeared in the rear window, hand pressed against the glass. The Ravens stood in the street, waving, until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. "Well, Danny," said eventually, wiping his eyes without shame, "that's that." "No," Ethan corrected gently. "That's just the beginning." They spent the afternoon at the house, their house, now discussing possibilities. Graham measured rooms for workshop space. Simon sketched plumbing modifications for a proper kitchen. James talked about reading programs and homework help. Marcus was already calculating costs for equipment. As evening fell, they gathered in the small garden behind the house, where Lily's pink bicycle still leaned against the shed. Someone, probably Mrs. Fletcher, had polished it until it gleamed. "We should keep that," Patrick said. "Reminder of why we do this." "Agreed," Ethan said. "First display piece for the youth center, with a plaque telling Lily's story, or as much of it as she'd once shared. Show kids that asking for help isn't weakness. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're struggling, and that sometimes help comes from the most unlikely sources," James added, looking round at his unlikely brothers. Morrison appeared at the garden gate, carrying a bottle of whiskey and plastic cups. "Thought you boys might appreciate this. Nothing fancy, but it's the good stuff." They sat in a circle as darkness fell, passing the bottle, talking about plans and dreams, about the kids they'd mentor, the lives they might touch, the way small acts of kindness rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict. "Do you think we're actually changed?" Danny asked. "Or are we still the same broken blokes, just with a nicer story?" "Both," Simon said firmly. "The brokenness doesn't disappear, but you learn to build something beautiful from the pieces." "Kintsukuroi," James said. Everyone looked at him. "Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold. The idea is that the piece becomes more beautiful for having been broken." Ethan thought about that, about scars that became sources of strength, about pain that taught compassion, about falling that made you appreciate standing. They were broken, yes, but they were also whole in ways that people who'd never shattered could never understand. "To the Ravens," Morrison said, raising his cup, "may they continue to fly in unexpected places." "To Lily and Grace," Marcus added, "who reminded us why we bother." "To second chances," Patrick said quietly. "To being seen," Simon whispered. They drank in comfortable silence, 7 men and a retired colonel, sitting in a small garden in a small town, having won a small victory that felt enormous. Above them, stars emerged one by one, distant lights in the darkness, each burning bright despite the void. Somewhere in Birmingham, a little girl was falling asleep clutching a pewter raven, dreaming of motorcycles and kindness. Somewhere in Larkspur village, neighbors were talking about what they'd witnessed, about courage and redemption, about judging less and helping more. And in a garden behind a white-painted house, the ravens sat together, no longer running from their pasts, but walking steadily into their futures, carrying their scars like wings. 6 months later, on a crisp spring morning, Ethan stood in front of the newly christened Ravens Youth Center, watching as teenagers arrived for the Saturday workshop. The house had been transformed, walls painted in cheerful colors, the main room filled with tools and workbenches, the kitchen stocked with donated supplies. Lily's bicycle hung on the wall beside a small brass plaque telling an edited version of her story, ending with, "Courage comes in all sizes. So does kindness." The program had started small, just a handful of kids, mostly referrals from social services, teens teetering on the edge of trouble. Now they had a waiting list. Marcus taught motorcycle maintenance, his patient explanations helping kids understand that machines, like people, could be fixed. James ran literacy programs, proving that it was never too late to learn. Simon led peer support groups, his own recovery journey, offering hope to those struggling with addiction. Danny taught basic electrical work, channeling his energy into something constructive. Graham handled woodworking, creating tangible results from raw materials. Patrick organized first aid training, passing on skills that saved lives. And Ethan, he mostly listened. He'd learnt that sometimes what people needed most was someone who heard them without judgment, who saw their potential instead of their problems, who believed in them when they'd stopped believing in themselves. Mr. Blake, a teenage girl named Amber, approached hesitantly. She'd arrived 3 months ago, angry and defensive, covered in tattoos that declared her rejection of mainstream society. Now she helped with younger kids, her natural leadership emerging when she felt safe enough to show it. "There's someone here to see you." Grace and Lily stood in the doorway, nearly unrecognizable from the desperate pair he'd met on that gray morning. Grace had gained healthy weight, her face no longer gaunt, her eyes bright with purpose. She wore professional clothes, a nurse's uniform visible beneath her jacket. But it was Lily who'd changed most dramatically. She'd grown several inches, her hair longer, her smile unguarded. She wore the pewter raven proudly around her neck. "We were visiting Mrs. Fletcher and had to stop by," Grace explained, looking around the center with wonder. Thomas would have loved this. Seeing beauty created from pain, Lily ran to Ethan, hugging him fiercely before pulling back. "I brought something." She opened her backpack and removed a large portfolio. "I've been working on this since we moved. Mummy said I should give it to you." The portfolio contained dozens of drawings, professionally rendered now, with training evident in every line. They depicted the story of what had happened. A girl with a bicycle, 7 motorcycles stopping, a house being repaired, a town hall confrontation, and finally, a youth center filled with hope. The final image showed the ravens riding into the sunset, their silhouettes heroic against a brilliant sky, with children waving from the roadside. "For the center," Lily said shyly, "to remind people that heroes don't always look like they're supposed to." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "These are incredible, Lily. You've inherited your father's gift. More than his gift," Grace said softly. "His heart too. He always wanted to create art that mattered, that helped people. Lily's doing that." The other ravens gathered around, examining the drawings with genuine appreciation. Marcus immediately started discussing framing options. James suggested they create a permanent exhibition wall. The teenagers crowded in too, awed by Lily's talent, seeing possibility in her journey from desperate child to confident young artist. "How's Birmingham?" Patrick asked. "Good," Grace said. "Really good. The hospital is wonderful. My colleagues are supportive, and Lily's thriving in her new school. She's even joined an art club." She paused, her expression serious. "But we needed to come back, to thank you properly, to show you that your kindness bore fruit." "You don't owe us anything," Ethan said. "I know, but I wanted you to see what you gave us, not just survival, but the chance to flourish. Lily draws now without fear. She creates beauty because she feels safe enough to dream. That's because of you, all of you." Morrison appeared then, having become a regular presence at the center, helping however he could. "Grace, Lily, wonderful to see you both looking so well." They talked for another hour, catching up on 6 months of life. Grace shared stories of difficult cases at work, moments when she'd advocated for patients, the way the Ravens had advocated for her. Lily showed them photographs of her artwork displayed in school exhibitions, her pride evident. The teenagers listened intently, learning that transformation was possible, that rock bottom wasn't permanent. Finally, it was time for them to leave. As they walked toward Grace's car, no longer the battered vehicle she'd driven before, but something reliable and safe, Lily turned back one last time. "Mr. Blake? I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "You saved us that day. But I think maybe we saved you too. Just a little bit." Ethan smiled, feeling truth in her words. "Maybe more than a little bit, Lily." After they left, he stood alone in front of the center, watching clouds drift across the spring sky. Inside, he could hear laughter, teenagers working together, learning skills, building confidence, discovering that their pasts didn't have to define their futures. His phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "New kid just arrived. Rough background, lots of anger. Reminds me of me. Want to sit in?" Ethan typed back, "On my way," because this was the work now. The daily, unglamorous, essential work of showing up, of being present, of offering hope to those who'd forgotten it existed. Not dramatic gestures, but consistent presence. Not grand rescues, but steady support. He thought of that morning 6 months ago, when they'd stopped their motorcycles for a girl with a sign. Such a small decision, barely conscious. But small decisions compounded into changed lives, and changed lives transformed communities. And transformed communities shifted the world incrementally toward justice. The Ravens had learned something that morning. Something more valuable than any treasure. That redemption wasn't found in grand gestures, but in simple choice to see someone who needed help and deciding to act. That broken people could build beautiful things. That the roughest hands could hold the kindest hearts. A raven landed on the fence post nearby. The actual bird, not just the Simbaland, cocked its head, regarding him with intelligent eyes. According to legend, ravens were messengers between worlds, carrying meaning from the seen to the unseen. This one seemed to approve of what it saw. Ethan raised his hand in acknowledgement, and the bird took flight, its wings catching the light as it soared upward into the brilliant sky. He watched it disappear into the distance, then turned and walked back into the center, where teenagers waited, where brothers worked, where hope was being carefully constructed from the ruins of despair. The motorcycles stood parked outside in their usual formation, 7 machines that had become symbols of unexpected heroism, reminders that help could arrive from unlikely sources, that judgment based on appearance was foolish, that every person deserved a chance at redemption. Inside, Amber was explaining engine mechanics to the new arrival, her words patient, her manner kind, passing forward what she'd been given. Marcus supervised, offering encouragement. James worked with a group on reading comprehension, celebrating small victories. Simon led a discussion circle where kids shared struggles without fear of condemnation. Graham and Danny collaborated on a woodworking project, teaching precision and patience. Patrick demonstrated bandaging techniques, showing how small skills could save lives. And Ethan joined them, adding his voice to the chorus of men who'd learned that being broken wasn't the end of the story but sometimes just the beginning, the breaking open that let light in, the shattering that created space for something new to grow. Outside, spring sunshine warmed the cobblestones of Larkspur village. Neighbors walked past the center, many waving now, their initial suspicion replaced by respect earned through consistent action. Mrs. Fletcher tended her garden next door, keeping watch over the place with grandmotherly pride. The village was changing, slowly, learning that second chances benefited everyone, that communities grew stronger when they lifted their weakest members, that kindness wasn't weakness, but the foundation of civilization. And somewhere on the motorway heading back to Birmingham, Grace drove carefully, while Lily sketched in her notebook, both of them carrying forward the lesson they'd learned, that even in your darkest moment, when you're selling your most precious possession just to survive, help might arrive in the form of 7 motorcycles stopping in the middle of the street. 7 unlikely heroes choosing to see you when you'd become invisible to everyone else. That the world, despite all evidence to the contrary, still contained magic, not the fairy tale kind, but the human kind, the magic of compassion overcoming judgments, of strangers becoming family, of pain transforming into purpose, of ravens taking flight even when their wings had been broken, and that sometimes, on grey mornings in small English towns, the roughest hands really do hold the kindest hearts. If this story touched your heart, don't leave just yet. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. We love reading your reflections. Tell us below, from which country are you watching today? Because kindness knows no borders, and neither do stories like this.